From Aaron Hernandez, whose life effectively ended the moment he was hit with a life sentence.
At this point, sir, you stand committed and you're in the custody of the court officers pending execution of your sentence at the state prison.
To Kevin Ware, who lost everything the second the judge handed him 30 years behind bars.
This time on your plea of guilty, I find you guilty, sentence you to 30 years. You're a man of the custody sheriff.
In this video, we're breaking down the NFL players whose lives ended the instant the verdict hit. Let's begin with Aaron Hernandez. No story is more shocking than that of Aaron Hernandez, the former New England Patriots tight end whose fall from grace was as dramatic as it was tragic. At his prime, he was an exceptional player, and his former teammate said it best.
I mean, first off, unbelievable football player, man.
Unreal.
You're talking about the playbook, me struggling with the playbook. That guy knew the plays inside and out, the run game and pass game, in like the first 2 weeks being in New England, while I struggled with it all the way until like week 8, you know? And he was balling right from the beginning. He was a basketball player out on the football field. That's what he was with his size.
Hernandez was convicted of first-degree murder in the killing of Odin Lloyd on April 15, 2015, and sentenced to life in prison without parole. But the story doesn't end there. It takes an even darker turn. His suicide on April 19, 2017, occurred just days after being acquitted of double murder charges, suggesting a possible connection to his legal proceedings. The timing was shockingly significant. Hernandez may have been aware of the abatement ab initio rule, which could vacate his conviction if he died before exhausting appeals, potentially benefiting his family financially. The complexity of Hernandez's case goes beyond the surface. Posthumously, Hernandez was diagnosed with stage 3 CTE, a brain disease linked to depression and impulsivity, which likely exacerbated his mental state during the stressful legal battles. His former teammate Rob Gronkowski later revealed disturbing details about Hernandez's behavior, describing incidents that painted a picture of a deeply troubled individual.
There's a lot of craziness, definitely, but I didn't mind it. Like I said, I loved it. And then I didn't see, it going to the level that it went to. I didn't see that happening. Like, that was a surprise. It was a surprise to everyone because you would never expect anyone, especially being in that position, to have it go to the level that it went to.
Up next, Ray Karuth. Ray Karuth's case remains one of the most calculated and heinous crimes ever committed by an NFL player, and it continues to haunt the league and its fans to this day. Once a promising wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers, Karuth's name is now forever linked with betrayal, cold-blooded violence, and one of the most disturbing murder conspiracies in professional sports history. Karuth was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, shooting into an occupied vehicle, and using an instrument with intent to destroy an unborn child. These charges stemmed from his involvement in the brutal 1999 drive-by shooting of Cherika Adams, his then-girlfriend, who was 8 months pregnant with their child at the time. The facts surrounding the case are particularly chilling. Karuth orchestrated the attack by enlisting a small group of accomplices, including Van Brett Watkins, Sr., who was the trigger man. Their goal was clear: silence Adams permanently before she gave birth to Karuth's child, allegedly out of fear that fatherhood would interfere with his career and financial future. On the night of November 16, 1999, Adams was driving behind Karuth's car when he abruptly stopped in front of her on a dark road in Charlotte, North Carolina. Trapped, she was ambushed as another car pulled up and fired 4 bullets into her vehicle. Despite suffering catastrophic injuries, Adams heroically managed to make a 911 call, identifying Karuth as the orchestrator of the shooting. Her call played a crucial role in unraveling the plot and bringing Karuth to justice. Adams clung to life for nearly 4 weeks before succumbing to her injuries on December 14, 1999. Her unborn child, Chancellor Lee Adams, was delivered by emergency cesarean section just hours after the shooting. Due to the trauma and lack of oxygen at birth, Chancellor was diagnosed with cerebral palsy and permanent brain damage. His life has been defined by tremendous adversity, but also by courage, resilience, and the unconditional love of his maternal grandmother, Sandra Adams, who raised him after Cherika's death. Karuth was acquitted of first-degree murder, a charge that could have resulted in the death penalty, but was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and the other related charges. Many observers at the time saw the jury's decision as a compromise verdict, one that acknowledged his role in the killing without going so far as to label him a direct murderer. Karuth was sentenced to 18 to 24 years in prison and served nearly 19 years before being released on October 22, 2018. Upon his release, Karuth made headlines again by expressing a public desire to reconnect with his son.
Whatever it took for me to be a part of Chancellor's life to make things right with him, I was and still am willing to do. He will never have his mother in his life. Right or wrong, he still has the opportunity to have me in his life.
Karuth's crime may have rocked the league, but it still sits in the shadow of the most infamous case involving an NFL superstar, one that split America in half. O.J. Simpson. No discussion of NFL players and legal troubles would be complete without mentioning O.J. Simpson. While he was famously acquitted in the 1995 murder trial of his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman, Simpson later faced serious legal consequences for different crimes that destroyed his life. We, the jury, in the above-entitled action find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown. Simpson, a human being, is charged in count 1 of the information. However, Simpson was convicted of 12 counts related to an armed robbery incident that occurred on September 13, 2007 at the Palace Station Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada. The charges included conspiracy to commit a crime, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, conspiracy to commit robbery, burglary while in possession of a deadly weapon, first-degree kidnapping with use of a deadly weapon, robbery with use of a deadly weapon, assault with a deadly weapon, and coercion with a deadly weapon. On December 5, 2008, Simpson was sentenced to 33 years in prison with a minimum of 9 years without parole. He served 9 years before being released on parole in 2017 and was discharged early from parole in December 2021. In a recent interview, Simpson reflected on his time in prison and maintained his innocence regarding the robbery charges, claiming the items were his personal property that had been stolen. While OJ's legal drama became a national spectacle, this next player's case unfolded quietly, but with horrific brutality that left no room for defense. Kevin Ware Jr. Kevin Ware Jr.'s case stands as a chilling example of the tragic escalation of criminal behavior. In May 2025, after pleading guilty, Ware received a severe sentence of 30 years in prison for the murder of Taylor Pomaski and tampering with evidence, which included burning her body and abandoning it in a ditch. The details of the murder case are harrowing. Pomaski disappeared following a party in April 2021, and her remains were discovered months later. Charging documents described Ware's alleged use of multiple methods to end her life, including a knife, a blunt object, and strangulation, with the grand jury noting that the exact manner and means remained unknown. Reports further elaborated that Ware allegedly cut her throat, struck her with a blunt object, strangled her, and then desecrated her remains by burning them. Aside from the murder charges, Ware faced additional legal consequences for separate incidents in April 2021. He was convicted on 2 counts of possession with intent to distribute a controlled substance and unlawful possession of a firearm by a felon. These charges resulted in a concurrent 15-year sentence, further underscoring the gravity of his criminal activities. The brutality and methodical nature of these crimes paint a disturbing portrait of Ware's behavior. His progression from drug-related offenses to the ultimate act of violence demonstrates a troubling escalation, highlighting the potential for individuals to move from minor infractions to the most serious felonies. As Ware begins his lengthy incarceration, his case remains as an example of the complexities and tragedies within the criminal justice system, emphasizing the need for vigilance in identifying and addressing early signs of escalating criminal behavior before they result in irreparable harm. Yet for all the horror in Ware's case, it pales in comparison to the bizarre and cult-driven path taken by the next former NFL player, Tommy Kane. Tommy Kane's case represents a harrowing and deeply tragic example of how domestic violence can spiral into irreversible consequences, even for those once idolized on the football field. Kane, a former wide receiver who played in both the NFL and CFL, had once been celebrated for his athletic prowess and competitive edge. But behind the glory and highlights, he battled inner demons, ones that would eventually explode into a horrifying act of violence. On November 30th, 2003, that tragic explosion occurred. Kane brutally assaulted and fatally stabbed his estranged wife, Tamara Sheikh, a 35-year-old mother of 4, inside his mother's home in LaSalle, a borough of Montreal, Quebec. The attack was savage. Tamara suffered a combination of blunt force trauma and multiple stab wounds. The incident occurred just days after she had filed for divorce and had gained full custody of their children. According to reports, Kane lured her to his mother's house under the pretense of signing paperwork related to their separation. Initially, Kane was charged with second-degree murder, a charge that implies intentional killing without premeditation. But in a controversial twist that shocked many, particularly domestic violence advocates, Kane struck a plea deal with prosecutors. On September 7, 2004, he pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of manslaughter, a decision that drew criticism from Sheikh's family and members of the public who felt justice was being compromised. The plea bargain hinged largely on Kane's documented struggles with clinical depression, substance abuse, and emotional instability in the years leading up to the murder. A court-appointed psychiatrist testified that Kane was suffering suffering from a significant depressive disorder at the time of the killing, which impaired his judgment and capacity for self-control. The prosecution agreed to reduce the charge based on these psychological assessments. And in November 2004, Kane was sentenced to 18 years in prison for manslaughter. While incarcerated, Kane reportedly made efforts to rehabilitate. In 2015, after serving over a decade behind bars, he was granted day parole, allowing him limited freedom outside the prison under strict supervision. Conditions of his release included mandatory participation in substance abuse treatment programs, regular psychological counseling, and routine drug testing to ensure compliance. However, even with these safeguards in place, Kane struggled to stay clean. In May 2019, his parole was revoked after he admitted to using drugs and refused to take a mandatory urine test, thereby breaching the conditions of his release. The relapse highlighted ongoing concerns about his mental health and stability, especially in the context of such a violent past. As a result, authorities sent him back to prison, reinforcing the long-standing concerns about his ability to function safely in society without consistent monitoring and treatment. The case of Tommy Kane remains a haunting reminder of how unresolved mental illness, substance abuse, and domestic conflict can converge into tragedy, and how the justice system continues to struggle with balancing rehabilitation, accountability, and protection of victims' rights. And when children become the victims, the pain cuts even deeper. This next ex-NFL player's case is one of the most gut-wrenching in NFL history: Sier Wood. The case of Sier Wood is among the most heartbreaking and disturbing in the history of the NFL, not just because of who was involved, but because of the unimaginable suffering inflicted on an innocent 5-year-old child. A former running back who once played for the Houston Texans and had brief stints with several other NFL teams, Wood's promising athletic career was completely eclipsed by the heinous crime that would come to define his legacy. On April 10, 2019, Wood was arrested in Las Vegas, Nevada, alongside his then-girlfriend Amy Taylor, after Taylor's daughter, Larea Davis, was found unresponsive in their apartment. Medical personnel responding to the scene quickly realized the situation was far more serious than a routine emergency. Larea was covered in injuries from head to toe. Over 100 bruises, 20 broken ribs, and a lacerated liver were among the devastating findings in the autopsy report. Tragically, she was declared dead shortly thereafter, and her death was ruled a homicide caused by blunt force trauma and sustained physical abuse. Prosecutors painted a harrowing picture of what life was like for the little girl in the final weeks of her life. Witnesses and investigators reported that Wood believed in a twisted form of punishment that he described as learning through fun. In reality, this involved forcing Larea to perform extreme physical exercises like jumping jacks, sit-ups, and wall sites for extended periods, sometimes until she collapsed. These exercises, typically associated with athletic training, became instruments of torture in the hands of someone who once made his living through sports. In April 2024, 5 years after his arrest, Wood entered an offered plea, a legal maneuver in which a defendant maintains their innocence but acknowledges that the evidence presented by prosecutors is likely enough to result in a conviction at trial. It was a controversial plea, given the mountain of evidence against him and the emotional toll the case had taken on the community and Larea's family. Still, the court accepted the plea, which allowed the case to avoid a lengthy trial while securing a conviction. Then, on August 13, 2024, Wood was formally sentenced. The court handed him life in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years for second-degree murder and an additional 28 months to 6 years for felony child abuse to be served consecutively. This means that even under the most favorable conditions, Wood must serve at least 12 years and 4 months before becoming eligible for parole. But given the gruesome nature of the crime and public outrage surrounding it, it's unclear whether parole would ever realistically be granted. The death of Larea Davis remains a chilling reminder that behind the public personas of athletes, there can sometimes be darkness. In Wood's case, a man once celebrated for his speed and strength on the field is now remembered for something far more sinister: his role in the violent death of a defenseless child. But the next man on this list didn't just harm his own family. He terrorized strangers in a string of violent home invasions that paralyzed an entire city: Keith Wright. Keith Wright's case involves a series of violent crimes that terrorized the Sacramento area. Wright was arrested on August 21, 2011 in Sacramento, California for a series of home invasion robberies and a sexual assault. The charges included armed robbery, kidnapping, burglary, and forcible oral copulation, linked to 3 incidents in the Natomas area between July and August 2011. On November 30th, 2012, Wright was sentenced to 234 years and 8 months in prison by Sacramento County Superior Court Judge Michael Savage. This followed his conviction in October 2012 on 19 charges, including armed robbery, kidnapping, first-degree burglary, false imprisonment, and forcible oral copulation. The crimes involved Wright threatening victims with a firearm, and in one particularly violent incident, sexually assaulting a woman and forcing her to drive to 2 different banks to withdraw money. DNA evidence and stolen items found in his home connected him to the crimes, providing overwhelming evidence of his guilt. The sentence, described as multiple life terms, ensures Wright will spend the rest of his life in prison, reflecting the severity and brutality of his actions. Some crimes take years to uncover. This next athlete lived free for 15 years, hiding a deadly secret that finally came to light in a cold case breakthrough. Eric Neposki. Eric Neposki's case shows how justice can sometimes take decades to arrive. Neposki was arrested on May 21, 2009. In Connecticut for the murder of millionaire investor Bill McLaughlin, which occurred on December 15, 1994 in Newport Beach, California. The arrest came after a 15-year cold case investigation by Orange County detectives. Eric Neposki was convicted on July 14, 2011 of first-degree murder, with special circumstances of financial gain and firearm use. On August 10, 2012, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The murder involved Neposki shooting McLaughlin 6 times in his kitchen, allegedly acting with McLaughlin's live-in girlfriend, Nanette Johnston, to collect on a $1 million life insurance policy. The motive was financial gain, with Neposki romantically involved with Johnston, who stood to benefit from McLaughlin's death. The case was notable for the 15-year delay between the crime and arrest, during which Neposki lived as a free man, working as a nightclub bouncer. The conviction was based on strong circumstantial evidence, including Johnston's testimony and forensic evidence linking Neposki to the crime scene. But while Neposki tried to outrun justice, this next ex-NFL player left a bloody trail over a decade, connecting multiple murder scenes with eerie precision. Anthony Smith. Anthony Smith's case spans multiple murders over nearly a decade. Smith was arrested in 2011 in connection with the murders of 4 men that occurred between 1999 and 2008. The specific crimes included the killings of Kevin Nettles and Ricky Nettles in November 1999, Dennis Henderson in June 2001, and Murillo Ponce in October 2008. On November 5, 2015, a Los Angeles County Superior Court jury convicted Smith of 3 counts of first-degree murder for the killings of Kevin Nettles, Ricky Nettles, and Dennis Henderson. The jury deadlocked on the 4th count related to Murillo Ponce, resulting in a mistrial for that charge. On January 22, 2016, Smith was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the 3 murders he was convicted of. The sentence ensures Smith will spend the rest of his life in prison, with no possibility of release. The crimes were particularly brutal, involving kidnapping, torture, and murder. The Nettles brothers were found with their heads wrapped in duct tape and Ricky's stomach branded with a burn in the shape of a clothing iron. Evidence linking Smith to the crimes included DNA, zip ties, rope, and books about killing techniques found in his possession. Meanwhile, one player was busy orchestrating chaos from inside the system, plotting murder from behind bars while facing a mountain of charges. But who was he? Darryl Henley. Darryl's fall from grace is a story of escalating criminal behavior that ultimately led to a decades-long prison sentence. Henley was arrested in 1993 in connection with a drug trafficking operation, following the arrest of a former Rams cheerleader, Tracy Donahoe, who implicated him in a cocaine distribution ring. In March 1995, Henley was convicted of drug conspiracy and possession charges. However, while awaiting sentencing, authorities uncovered an even more serious plot. Henley was found to have plotted to murder the judge and a witness, leading to further convictions for conspiracy to commit murder and bribery. In 1997, Henley was sentenced to 41 years in prison, comprising 20 years for drug charges and an additional 21 years for the murder plot. The sentence ensures he will likely spend the rest of his life incarcerated, with parole eligibility not coming until 2037, when he would be 76 years old. The case involved Henley allegedly using a smuggled cellular phone in jail, bribing a guard for $3,000 monthly, and offering $100,000 for each killing. However, the hitmen were undercover federal agents, leading to his downfall. Henley has maintained his innocence regarding some aspects of the case and continues to seek legal remedies through his personal website and foundation. And then there's this next athlete, a gifted player who received chance after chance until his violent impulses ultimately sealed his fate. Lawrence Phillips. Lawrence Phillips' story is one of repeated chances and escalating violence that ultimately ended in tragedy. Phillips was arrested several times, starting in 1994 for various violent offenses, including assault, vandalism, and disturbing the peace, with charges escalating to domestic violence and murder. Phillips was sentenced to a total of 31 years in prison, with a 6-year sentence in 2008 for a 2005 assault requiring at least 85% served before parole eligibility, and an additional 25 years in 2009 for assault convictions served consecutively. The 2005 case involved Phillips driving his car into 3 teenagers after a dispute during a pickup football game. The 2009 convictions were for assault on his former girlfriend, including assault with great bodily injury, false imprisonment, making criminal threats, and auto theft. In 2015, Phillips was charged with first-degree murder for killing his cellmate Damian Soward, with a motion for the death penalty granted. However, his life ended tragically on January 12, 2016, ruled a suicide by hanging in prison, with a "do not resuscitate" note found on him. But if you thought Phillips's crimes were disturbing, then this next athlete's fall from grace involved betrayal, assault, and a sentence that will keep him behind bars for decades. Dave Megot, once celebrated as one of the NFL's greatest return specialists, saw his legacy destroyed by serious criminal convictions. Megot was arrested in January 2009 in North Charleston, South Carolina, for allegedly raping and robbing a 21-year-old college student at her home. He was convicted on November 10, 2010, after a 3-day trial, with the jury finding him guilty of first-degree criminal sexual conduct and first-degree burglary. On November 11, 2010, Megot was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with a requirement to serve at least 85% of the sentence, 25.5 years, before parole eligibility. The case involved allegations that Megot broke into the victim's home and assaulted her over a debt she owed him. He is currently serving his sentence at Lieber Correctional Institution in Ridgeville, South Carolina, with his earliest possible release date of July 6, 2034. Megot's case was particularly notable because of his history of legal issues, including previous arrests for assault and sexual battery, which established a pattern of violent behavior that culminated in his current imprisonment. Some stories involve calculated intent. Others are tragic accidents with devastating outcomes. This next case shows how one night behind the wheel can change everything. Dwayne Goodrich. Dwayne Goodrich's case involves a tragic hit-and-run accident that claimed 2 lives and ended his NFL career. Goodrich was involved in a hit-and-run accident on January 14, 2003 in Dallas, Texas, where he struck and killed 2 men, Demont Matthews and Joby Wood, who were helping at a burning car crash site on Interstate 35E. Goodrich was convicted of 2 counts of criminally negligent homicide in August 2003, with additional charges of failure to stop and render aid added later. He was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison and fined $20,000 in August 2003, with an additional 5-year sentence in January 2006 for failure to stop and render aid served concurrently. The victims, Matthews and Wood, were acting as good Samaritans, trying to rescue a driver from a burning car when Goodrich struck them at high speed. Witnesses claimed he was driving over 100 miles per hour, though accident reconstruction experts estimated his speed at between 54 and 80 miles per hour at the time of impact. He was released on parole in 2011 after serving approximately 6 years, suggesting he received credit for good behavior. Since his release, Goodrich has focused on rehabilitation and speaking to groups about the consequences of poor choices, earning his degree in sociology with a concentration in criminal justice. If you enjoyed watching this video, check out our other awesome videos on the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.